They always came to me for money, friends, family, even neighbors. I never said no. Until one day, I set a single condition. And just like that, they all vanished. It started small. A friend needed $50 to cover a late phone bill, and I had it, so I gave it. A neighbor's kid was selling overpriced candles for a school fundraiser, so I bought 3 boxes. My cousin Jimmy's car broke down, and he needed help covering the repair. Sure, I wrote the check. I never asked for receipts, never brought up repayment. I told myself that was what decent people did. The thing is, word gets around faster than you think. One day you are just helping a buddy in a bind, and before you know it, you are the unofficial emergency fund for half your social circle. Some came with tears in their eyes, some with stories so tragic you felt cold saying no, and others just laid it on thick, dropping hints about their tough month until you offered. My brain knew I should have been careful, but my heart was wired to give in. I remember this one night, middle of winter, when my downstairs neighbor, Tanya, knocked at my door wearing slippers and a hoodie. She said her heat had been shut off and she just needed a little something to get it turned back on. Her lips were trembling, and not just from the cold. I opened my wallet without a second thought. 2 weeks later, I spotted her at a bar down the street, ordering cocktails that cost more than the gas bill she had claimed was overdue. Still, I told myself it was none of my business. Then there was my old high school friend Derek. He called me after 10 years of no contact, his voice heavy like he had swallowed gravel. He said his mom was in the hospital and the insurance company was dragging its feet. He just needed $500 to hold them over for a few days. I wired the money before the call ended. 3 months passed without a word from him. When I finally reached him, he admitted the story was kinda exaggerated, but swore he would pay me soon. I am still waiting. Looking back, I cannot even count the number of times I handed over money I knew I would never see again. I was not rich, not even close, but I worked hard and budgeted well enough to have a cushion. And every time someone pressed on my weak spot, I told myself it was just one more favor. By the time I hit 40, I had lent out enough to put a decent down payment on a house, if only I had kept it. Instead, I had a long mental list of IOUs that would never be honored. And yet, I kept saying yes, because it felt better than dealing with the guilt that hit me every time I even thought about saying no. That was my life, until one particular knock on my door made me pause, hand on my wallet, wondering if maybe it was finally time to do things differently. If there was an Olympic event for making a grown man feel like a heartless monster, my friends, relatives, and neighbors would have swept the podium. Every request felt like it came wrapped in a movie script, one where I was cast as the hero who could save the day with my checkbook. I can still picture my cousin Paula's face the night she showed up at my place, holding her baby on one hip and a stack of unpaid bills in the other. She spoke in a whisper, like the baby might understand every word. "I just need enough to keep the lights on until Friday," she said, eyes glassy. I gave her the cash without counting it, feeling like some kind of knight in a modern fairy tale. That Friday came and went without a call. By the next month, she had a new phone, a bigger TV, and, ironically, the lights in her apartment still got shut off. Then there was Ricky, a buddy from my construction days. He called me one afternoon with his voice hoarse, telling me his truck had been stolen with all his tools inside. He could not work without them, and without work, his kids would have nothing for Christmas. I drove straight to his place and handed him half the cost of replacing the tools. 3 weeks later, I saw his stolen truck parked outside a casino, looking fine as ever. Even the little manipulations left dents. Mrs. Carver from down the block used to corner me outside my building. She had that grandmotherly tone that made, "Would you mind helping me out?" sound like a request to carry groceries instead of hand over cash. She always had a story: grandson's school fees, medicine her insurance would not cover, a bus ticket to see her sister. I never asked for proof. I never asked for anything. She repaid me once, in the form of a banana bread loaf that tasted like glue. And the guilt trips, God, the guilt trips, were worse than any sob story. If I so much as hesitated, people got this look, like I had just pushed their puppy into traffic. I remember one guy, Dave, who told me flat out that if I did not help him out with rent, he would have to move back in with his parents. He said it like that would be my fault. I lent him the money. He moved back in with his parents anyway. Every one of these moments chipped away at me, but I kept telling myself that it was just money, and I could make more. What I did not see at the time was how my yes had turned into an open invitation. By the time the knock came that would change everything, I had become the first name on everyone's mental list when life threw them a curveball, or when they just wanted to dodge the pitch entirely. The guy at my door that day was someone I had known since high school, and I could tell from the way he shifted his weight before speaking that he had a story ready. What I did not know yet was that his request would be the one that finally pushed me to lay down a rule that would make all of them vanish. The guy at my door was Mark Sanders. I had not seen him in a couple years, but we went way back. High school baseball, late-night diner runs, the kind of history that makes you feel like you owe each other something. He stood there in a frayed hoodie and a ball cap pulled low, like he was trying to hide from the world. His eyes darted over my shoulder into my apartment, as if scanning for signs of how well I was doing. He launched straight into his pitch. His girlfriend was pregnant. He was behind on rent. His boss had cut his hours without warning. It all rolled out in one breath, polished enough that I knew he had rehearsed it on the way over. He asked for $700, promising he would pay it back in 2 weeks, max. Normally, this is where I would sigh, pull out my wallet, and hand over whatever I had. But that morning, something was different. Maybe it was the way my stomach tightened when I realized I had heard some version of this exact speech from a dozen people before. Maybe it was remembering how my own bills were starting to pile higher than I liked. Or maybe I had just finally had enough of feeling like a walking ATM. I told him I could help, on one condition. He perked up instantly, like he had just won the lottery. I will give you the $700, I said slowly. If you sign a simple agreement saying you will pay it back by the date you promised. Nothing complicated, just a piece of paper with your name and the amount, so we both have it in writing. The change in his face was instant. His smile vanished like someone had yanked a cord. He laughed, but it was hollow. You do not trust me? I told him it was not about trust. It was about making sure I was not just handing out money that disappeared into the ether. He stared at me for a long second, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Then he muttered something about figuring it out on his own and turned to leave. No handshake. No promise to come back later. Just gone. I stood there in the doorway for a while, feeling this strange mix of pride and discomfort. It was the first time in years I had set any boundary at all, but it also felt like I had just slammed a door on someone who might genuinely need help. The next day, I got a text from Tanya, the neighbor who once needed money for heat. She said she was in a bind again, and could I spot her $100 until next week? I sent her the same offer. Happy to help, just need something in writing. She never replied. By the end of that week, 3 more people reached out. All of them backed out the second I mentioned paperwork. No one even tried to negotiate. It was like I had just flipped off the neon free money sign above my head, and the street outside went quiet. That quiet was nice for a while, until I realized what it actually meant. It was eerie how fast it happened. For years, my phone had been a constant buzz, texts, calls, late-night knocks at the door. People checking in just to say hi, but always circling back to some money problem by the end of the conversation. Now nothing. Not even the fake, "How are you doing?" warm-up. My phone sat face down on the counter for days without a single vibration. At first, I told myself it was a good thing. Peace and quiet. No guilt trips. No last-minute emergencies that somehow always coincided with concert tickets going on sale or some vacation plan falling apart. But as the days stretched into weeks, the silence felt heavier than I expected. I started noticing how thin my social circle actually was when you took away the people who needed something from me. There were folks I thought of as close friends who apparently did not have much interest in grabbing a coffee unless I was covering the bill. Family members who used to drop by stopped showing up altogether. Even casual acquaintances, the kind who always had a funny story before sliding into a request, just disappeared. One Saturday, I ran into Ricky at the gas station. This was the guy whose truck had supposedly been stolen years back. He gave me a nod, but kept walking like I was a stranger. No small talk. No "how's it going?" Just gone. I watched him drive off and realized that was the first time I had seen him without him asking for anything. Holidays were the strangest. Normally, I got invited to every big family dinner, not out of love, but because I always brought the nicest wine and covered half the groceries. That year, I got a vague group text about keeping it small and maybe next time. Translation: no financial contribution, no chair at the table. I try not to take it personally, but deep down, I knew the truth. All those years I thought I was building goodwill, What I was really building was dependence. And the moment I put a condition on it, that dependence snapped clean in half. The worst part? A tiny voice in the back of my head kept asking if maybe they had all been right about me, that my worth to them really had just been my wallet. Then, right when I was starting to settle into this quieter, lonelier version of my life, I got a knock on my door that pulled me right back into the old feelings. This time, it was not just another emergency. It was something much bigger, and a request that would test whether I could actually stick to my own rules. The knock came on a rainy Thursday night, the kind where the air feels heavy and every sound outside is muffled. I opened the door to see my sister, Claire, standing there with her hair plastered to her forehead, clutching a folder against her chest like it was the only thing keeping her upright. We were not especially close, but we had history, shared bedrooms as kids, shared the same tired stories about Dad's bad jokes, shared the same frustration when Mom forgot birthdays. She looked exhausted, the kind of tired that comes from more than just a lack of sleep. She stepped inside without waiting for me to invite her. I noticed right away she was avoiding eye contact. She dropped onto my couch, set the folder on the coffee table, and finally looked up. "It's the house," she said. Her voice cracked on the last word. Turns out, she and her husband were 3 months behind on the mortgage. The bank had sent a final notice. They had 2 weeks before foreclosure proceedings would start. The number she needed to cover the debt, $10,000, hung between us like a weight. This was not like Tanya's fake heat bill or Ricky's truck that wasn't stolen. This was my own sister. Losing her house would mean she, her husband, and their 2 kids would have to move into some cramped rental or worse. I pictured my niece and nephew's bedrooms, the drawings taped to their walls, the little dinosaur lamp that stayed on all night in my nephew's room. My first instinct was the same as always. Say yes, fix it, take the burden off her shoulders. But the other part of me, the part that had been slowly growing since Mark Sanders walked away from my offer of a written agreement, was louder now. I told her I could help, if she signed a repayment agreement. No complicated terms, no interest, just her name, the amount, and a schedule she felt she could stick to. The look she gave me was worse than if she had screamed. Disbelief, then hurt, then something sharper. "I'm your sister," she said, like that was supposed to be the only contract that mattered. I reminded her that I had been burned too many times before, that I could not keep giving without any boundaries. I said I needed to protect myself, and this was the only way I could feel good about helping. She shook her head slowly, like she was seeing me for the first time and not liking the view. She closed the folder, stood up, and said she would figure it out. She walked out into the rain without another word. I stood there with the door open, watching her taillights disappear into the wet night, wondering if I had just saved myself or lost something I would never get back. 2 days later, I found out she had gone to someone else for the money. The following week felt like walking through a fog. No texts from Claire, no calls, not even a passive-aggressive post on social media that I could pretend was not about me. She had gone silent, and in our family, silence was louder than any shouting match. Word traveled fast, though. My cousin Paula messaged me one morning with a not-so-subtle, "Heard you are charging your own sister interest now." I ignored it. Then my mother called, and the first thing out of her mouth was, "How could you turn your back on family?" No hello, no small talk, just a guilt trip in its purest form. I tried explaining it to her, telling her I had not said no, that I had simply asked for something in writing, something that would hold us both accountable. She sighed so dramatically I could hear it echo in the kitchen on her end. "You have changed," she said. The way she said it made it clear she did not mean it as a compliment. The part that stung most was realizing how many people must have heard Claire's version of the story, and how few were interested in hearing mine. Overnight, I went from the reliable one to the selfish one. Not because I stopped helping, but because I stopped helping without conditions. It made me think about all the years before this. How many of those warm smiles and "you're the best" moments were genuine, and how many were just prepayment for the next ask. One night, I sat in my living room with the lights off, listening to the rain hit the windows, and I counted them in my head. The friends who vanished. The relatives who only called when the bills came due. The neighbors who suddenly had other people to bother. The number was higher than I wanted to admit. But here was the thing. Underneath the disappointment, there was this tiny flicker of relief. Like I had finally stepped out of a role I never actually auditioned for. The quiet hurt, but it was honest. And I realized I had not been able to say that about my relationships in a long time. Just as I was starting to make peace with this new, smaller circle of people, I got an unexpected letter in the mail. The return address made my stomach turn before I even opened it. It was from someone I thought I would never hear from again. The envelope was thin, the kind you buy in a bulk pack, but my name was written in careful block letters, like the sender wanted to make sure there was no mistaking who it was for. The return address was from another state, one I had not been to in almost a decade. But the name in the corner hit me harder than any postmark could. Derek. The same Derek who had called me years ago claiming his mother was in the hospital, who I had sent $500 to without blinking, who never paid me back and vanished without a word. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at it, debating whether to open it or toss it straight into the trash. Curiosity won. Inside was a single page, handwritten, shaky in places like the pen had paused too long. He started by saying he knew I probably hated him, that I had every reason to. He admitted that back then, his emergency had been a lie. The money had gone to cover a gambling debt, and when he realized he could not repay me, he let the shame keep him silent. Then he dropped the real reason for writing. He was in trouble again. Only this time, he claimed it was different. He was in a rehab program, working to get clean, but the program had fees he could not cover. He said he had no one else to ask. No one who would even consider helping him after all he had done. It was the oldest trick in the book, the I have changed plea, but something in his words felt off. Not dishonest exactly, but desperate in a way that was uncomfortably familiar. I sat there for a long time, the letter on the table, the rain tapping against the window like it was keeping count of my hesitation. In the past, I would have grabbed my wallet before the ink had even dried on his signature. Now, the new rule echoed in my head. No help without boundaries. I thought about sending him a check with the same written agreement I had offered everyone else. But the idea of tying myself to his spiral again made my chest feel tight. Instead, I wrote him back. I told him if he could get the program director to contact me directly, verify the costs, and put everything in writing, I would consider covering part of the fee. Not all of it, just part. Enough to show I was willing to meet him halfway if he was serious. I mailed it the next day. A week later, the phone rang. It was not Derek. It was the program director. And what she told me made my skin crawl. The woman on the phone introduced herself as the program director at the rehab facility Derek had listed in his letter. Her voice was steady, professional, the kind you hear from someone who has had to deliver bad news too many times. She confirmed Derek was enrolled there, but then came the part that made my stomach twist. He had already been discharged. Not for finishing the program, but for leaving against staff advice. 3 weeks earlier, the letter he sent me, that had been written after he was long gone. Worse, she said I was not the first person he had pulled into this. Apparently, Derek had mailed out a stack of similar letters to old friends, co-workers, even a couple of his relatives. Same story, same amount requested, same pitch about turning his life around. I thanked her for the honesty and hung up, staring at my phone like it had just turned into something dangerous. I should have felt vindicated, like I had caught him red-handed before losing more money. But what I actually felt was tired. Just bone-deep tired of the same pattern over and over. The faces changed, the stories changed, but the ending was always the same. Someone asked, I gave, they vanished. That night, I dug through an old shoebox in my closet, the one where I had stuffed years of IOUs, scribbled notes, and barely legible promises. Some were from people I had not spoken to in over a decade. Others were from relatives I still saw at family gatherings, who acted like those debts had never existed. One by one, I read them. I'll get you back Friday. As soon as my tax refund comes. You're a lifesaver, man. I won't forget this. But they had forgotten. Every single one. By the time I put the last note back in the box, something had shifted in me. I was done thinking of myself as the guy who was supposed to save everyone else. I was done being the fallback plan, the safety net, the first name that popped into someone's head when their own bad decisions caught up with them. It felt like closing a chapter. But part of me wondered, if I really meant it, what would happen the next time someone I cared about came knocking? I got my answer sooner than I thought. 3 days later, someone did knock. And this time, it was not just a friend or a neighbor. It was someone I had once sworn I would do anything for. It was just after sunset when I heard it. 3 sharp knocks, the kind that sound urgent but controlled. I opened the door and froze. It was my father. We had not been close in years. Our relationship had weathered more than its share of storms. Arguments about money, about family, about my so-called responsibility to others. He was the one who had drilled into me that family comes first, no matter what. He was also the one who, years ago, had borrowed a few thousand to cover a rough patch and never brought it up again. He looked older than I remembered, shoulders hunched, face drawn tight. He asked if he could come in, and I stepped aside. Once we sat down, he went straight into it. His business, an auto repair shop he had run for over 20 years, was on the brink of shutting down. The bank had denied his loan application. He needed $8,000 to make it through the next month. If he could get that, he swore, he could catch up and keep the doors open. Hearing him talk, I felt that old pull, the one that used to make me reach for my wallet without a thought. This was my dad, the man who taught me how to ride a bike, who patched up my knees when I fell. No scammer, no neighbor with a cooked-up excuse. This was blood. I took a deep breath and told him I could help, if we put it in writing. Clear terms, repayment schedule, both of us signing it. The shift in his expression was immediate. His eyes hardened, and he let out a short laugh. You're really going to treat your own father like some stranger off the street? I told him I was treating him like someone I respected enough to make sure we were both protected. That if we did this right, there would be no bad blood later. He stared at me for a long time, then shook his head. Forget it. I'll find another way. He stood, pulled on his jacket, and left without even saying goodbye. The sound of the door closing felt like the final page of a book I had been reading my whole life. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, replaying his face in my head, the hurt in it, the anger, and under all of that, the realization that maybe what he wanted from me was not just money, it was the old version of me. The one who never asked questions, the one who always said yes. But that guy was gone. I had one more step to take before I could finally close this chapter for good. A week passed before I heard anything more from my father. No calls, no messages, not even a second-hand update from another relative. The silence should have felt like a punishment, but it did not. It felt clean, like a room that had finally been cleared of old clutter. I spent those days thinking about all the years before. Every time I had handed over cash without question. Every time I told myself it was kindness. But the truth hit me like a cold wave. It was not kindness. It was permission. Permission for people to keep leaning on me instead of standing on their own. Permission for them to see me as a resource, not a person. And every time I said yes without hesitation, I had trained them to believe I always would. I thought about that shoebox of IOUs in my closet, all those broken promises stacked together like a quiet little archive of every time I put myself second. I pulled it out, set it on the coffee table, and one by one, I fed each slip of paper into the shredder. The sound was strangely satisfying. When the last one was gone, I sat back and realized something. For the first time in years, I did not feel like I owed anyone anything. Not money, not explanations, not guilt. The circle around me was smaller now, quieter, yes, but the people left in it were the ones who showed up without an agenda. Friends who still called just to talk. A neighbor who brought me a plate of cookies last weekend without asking for a dime. It was not the same busy, noisy life I used to have, but it was honest. And I finally understood that honesty was worth more than being the guy who always comes through. I will not lie. There are still moments when I wonder what would have happened if I had just kept saying yes. If I would still have those same people around me, laughing at my table, pretending things were fine. But I know now those laughs would have been hollow, just like the thanks I used to get. So if anyone asks me today why I stopped handing out money with no strings attached, I give them the truth. Saying yes all the time was never kindness. It was just a way of telling people they could take advantage of me again and again. And the day I stopped, I finally stopped letting them.